All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this live webinar. This is our second installment or episode in our ISO IEC 17025 Nonconformance series with A2LA. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll go ahead and close the poll. So thank you for everybody that participated in that. And we'll go ahead and get going on the presentation today. Today we're going to really focus on management review requirements. And so it's a very fun, interesting topic. We're really excited to hear what you guys think about the presentation. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, this is being recorded. So if you do want to watch it again, we have others in your organization you want to send it to. Because you registered, you'll automatically get that recording link once it's available, and it'll be sent to you through email. So please feel free to watch that and see what it has to say. Also, we are going to be having a Q&A section towards the end of the presentation. We do allocate some time to go through some of your questions or comments and take some time to answer those. So as things come up or are top of mind, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section of the live Zoom webinar, and we'll make sure that we are addressing those towards the end. We do have a mix of attendees on it. It was fun to watch the polls come in because we actually have a number of Qualtrics users on the call today as well as many people who don't even know who Qualtrics is. So before we get started, I do want to tell you a little bit about who we are. My name is Karen Arriviaga, and I'm an account executive here at Qualtrics. We are an all-in-one compliance management software platform. Really, we're specifically designed to help manage quality initiatives. Organizations turn to Qualtrics when they're looking to reduce or eliminate the burden associated with manual or sometimes paper-based systems by automating key processes. We were actually founded back in 1993 when our parent company was pursuing ISO 9001. They were looking for a way to streamline the process and make sure that no details were overlooked. So they started from scratch and built the framework that would ultimately become Qualtrics today. They crushed their audit, but not only that, the assessor also was impressed with the software and said, hey, you should think about sharing this with others. So we did. Today, more than 25 years later, we are a leader in the quality and compliance industry, and we're happy to count several accrediting bodies among our customers, including today's presenter, A2LA. So without further ado, I want to introduce Frenika Rivers. So for the last 2 years, Frenika has served on the as an accreditation officer on the calibration team at A2LA. Prior to working at A2LA, she started her career in school-based accreditation, beginning on the member organization side, and then as staff for the accrediting organization. Frenika served as a teaching assistant in her graduate work and shares being part of the learning, really enjoys being part of that learning experience. So Frenika, at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to share yours, and you can take over and start your portion of the presentation.
Welcome, everyone. My name again is Frenika Rivers, and I'm an accreditation officer at A2LA. Today, we'll be discussing the management.
Frenika, I don't see your screen yet.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Here we are. Okay, again,
Yay!
welcome.
I can see it now and hear you great.
Great. Okay, my name is Frenika Rivers, and I'm an accreditation officer at A2LA. Today, we'll be discussing management review requirements and the top areas of nonconformities that A2LA assessors have identified in their assessments. To give you an overview of what will be discussed today, we'll talk about the importance of the management review, and I will introduce ways to help you think about how you should complete your management review that you could find helpful to the operation of your laboratory. We'll also review the requirements of the standard, as well as point out requirements that are new under the 2017 version of the standard. And we will identify and discuss top areas that A2LA assessors have cited as nonconformances to Section 8.9. It's easy to think of 17025 assessments happening from an external source, but the true work of 17025 happens every day in the laboratory. From the policies and procedure that govern the work of the laboratory come the internal audits that assess the quality and efficiency of these. The management review informs decisions and gives opportunities to discuss lab operations based on the strength of the lab or areas that need improvement. Many labs recognize that the continual improvement of the laboratory comes through the management review. The key question every person in the laboratory should ask is the following. Does what I do affect the results we are providing to our customer internally or externally? Essentially, the same as we saw in our last slide, how are we doing? Management reviews are key to ensuring that the customer's needs are being met. Listed here are the inputs for section 8.9.2 in the management review. We'll look at each of these requirements in depth in the coming slides. But all of these inputs point us back to our customer. While 17025-2017 does not prescribe how often the management review needs to happen, your team should take time to decide how often management reviews need to occur for your laboratory. One more note of caution about this, if there are other standards your lab operates by, like forensic lab requirements or FDA requirements, there may be prescribed management review intervals. You want to be sure you are compliant with the most stringent standard followed by your laboratory. You may think about management reviews as top management sitting around a huge table discussing laboratory operations, but I'd encourage you to think of management reviews in integrated ways in the day-to-day operations of the lab. They could happen by choosing an input and meeting about it monthly. You may have executive or senior management discuss some areas and other management reviews with supervisors or mid-management. These meetings can be formal, or they can be informal through having management huddles, water cooler, coffee, or even lunch meetings. Management reviews can have different forms and can happen at different levels of management. Decide the type of management review that works best for your laboratory. Let's take a look at the first clause of section 8.9. In looking at this clause, we can pull out the key points. As we talked about earlier, the management review needs to occur at planned intervals. Again, you want to consider the risk involved when deciding your spacing. You also want to ensure you're choosing an interval that is the most stringent of the standards that your laboratory follows. We also need to ensure that the management system is suitable, adequate, and effective. Do the stated policies and objectives allow the lab to do the best work for your customers? The nonconformances that arose from this clause were usually tied to the fact that the laboratory had no documented management review. Even if your laboratory consists of me, myself, and I, you want to especially be sure you're holding management reviews. Do reflect on the life of your lab. You can probably think of instances in your personal life in which you have a review of what's working or what's not working. For example, every few weeks I take stock of my own life. Am I going to have to hide any shopping bags in the car this month? Did I actually schedule my eye appointment? Did my family like or dislike certain dinners from the past month? In the same way, even if you're a one-person lab, making space for management reviews can give yourself an opportunity to see the lab more objectively, since you may be in all of the trenches all of the time. Let's talk a little more about the policies and objectives of the lab. The objectives of your lab need to support the goals of your lab. Objectives are key performance indicators, quantifiable measurements used to evaluate the success of the lab. If the objectives are being met, then goals can be reached. Many of you have probably heard of SMART goals. You can probably name them along with me: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. When hearing about SMART goals, it's tempting to tie it directly to a goal. SMART, however, really should be tied to objectives, the areas that bring focus in order to reach the goal. This is a tool to help guide the goal-setting process, the policies and objectives of your lab. When we bring SMART to policies and objectives, it can strengthen the likelihood that the goals of the lab will be successful. In turn, this allows your laboratory to bring an excellent product to your customer. You may remember this slide from earlier in the presentation. We're going to move into discussing each input and how it helps to measure if customer expectations are being met or exceeded. Management reviews allow you to take the pulse of your laboratory. All levels of the laboratory and its operations are reviewed to check kind of the lifeline of the lab. We'll now move into looking at specific inputs of the management review. A, changes in internal and external issues that are relevant to the laboratory. This is a new requirement for 17025. Internal issues could be staff changes or workload changes that impact the laboratory. External issues could be product related, whether a critical supplier is running low on inventory or pricing went up for an often used material. Other external factors could include competitors or legislation that could affect the field of your work. The management review is asking management to focus on factors outside of the lab in order to make adjustments if necessary in meeting market demands and market requirements. As a lab, you need to consider the context of your organization. B, the fulfillment of objectives. You're setting objectives to measure the success of your lab. Objectives measure if the lab is on target to achieve its goals. Again, you can think about SMART goals here: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. C, the suitability of policies and procedures. This could include goals that need to be changed because of other influence, like the internal and external issues that were mentioned in Clause A. D, the status of actions from previous management reviews. This is also a new requirement. If there were action items made in any of the previous management reviews, this clause is asking for the status of those. E, outcome of recent internal audits. The outcomes could include the status of actions and or an evaluation of how effective the actions were from the internal audit. Again, our management review is a barometer. It's a health check of our laboratory. We'll continue in 8.9.2 with F, corrective actions. These actions could come from the internal audit. Here, management can discuss the status of the actions, whether corrections and or improvements have been made based on those. G, assessments by its external bodies. These external audits could include your accreditation assessments or even assessments from customers. H, changes in the volume and type of work or in the range of laboratory activities. One measurement of this is through any scope changes that may have occurred since the last management review. I, customer and personnel feedback. The management should include feedback that has been solicited, or in the case of J, complaints, feedback that has not been solicited. K, effectiveness of any implemented improvements. This also is a new requirement. If there have been any implemented improvements, make sure these are included in the review. Sources of these improvements can come from the external assessments, internal audits, or even corrective actions. L, adequacy of resources. This should review items like the laboratory's personnel, the facilities and environmental conditions, the lab's equipment, traceability needs if you're a calibration lab, and review of any externally provided products and services. M, risk is a prominent theme in the 2017 version of 17025, and this clause about risk identification is new. These could include discussion around impartiality and also actions that have been taken to address risk. If you're struggling with how to manage risk in your lab, there are tools available to help. For example, A2LA Workplace Training has a course in managing risk in your laboratory processes. N, outcomes of the assurance of the validity of results. This ties to 7.7 of the standard. How is the laboratory sure that the results are valid? You may assure validity by monitoring detectable trends or performance. Other ways of assuring validity are through proficiency testing and interlaboratory comparisons. And lastly, for section 8.9.2, other relevant factors. Other factors might include any training that personnel has undergone or other things that you may be doing to monitor your lab activities. So I love acrostics. They're a way to help me think through complex processes. If I cannot spell out the word, then I immediately know I'm missing something. So let's use the word pulse, kind of thinking about our management reviews as our lifeline, as a way to build language around the inputs. Process, are the processes used sufficient? User, this is tied directly to our customers. Lab, do we have the right staff? Do we have the right equipment? Has our work changed? Status, where are we in our outcomes? Exposure, a huge component of the 2017 version of the standard is risk. As a lab, you need to evaluate risk or exposure that could leave the lab vulnerable in its operations. So we're going to take a look at different clauses within 8.9.2 and apply pulse to these. So let's look at C, suitability of policies and procedures. Questions that you could ask during your management review to ensure that you're covering everything could be: process, what are the policies and procedures of the laboratory? Are they sufficient? Then user, how do our policies and procedures impact our customers? Lab, are we using the most up-to-date procedures for our customers' needs? Are we letting them know if a procedure or test they are requesting has been updated? Status, have we had any changes in our policy or procedures that have contributed to improvements or need more improvement? Exposure, are we impartial in the way our policies are written? Let's take I, customer and personnel feedback, and again go through pulse. Process, how are we soliciting feedback? Do we follow our quality manual in the feedback process? User, are we asking the right questions to get feedback? Are we making it easy for our customers to give feedback? Lab, are we open to the feedback we receive as a lab? Status, have we made any improvements based on feedback we have received? Exposure, could we be missing out on opportunities for improvement because we have not accepted productive feedback? And we'll use pulse again and look at L, adequacy of resources. Process, how are we ensuring that we are getting the job done with the resources that we have? User, are our customers satisfied with the way we produce our work? Lab, do the staff have the equipment and time they need to do the work? Status, have we identified any inadequacies in our resources? Exposure, are we missing any resources that ultimately could cause damage to the quality of our work? We'll then move on to 8.9.3, and this is focused on the outputs of the management review, and it also needs to be recorded. In this section, we're tying together the requirements of 8.9.2 and using those to bring continued improvement to the lab. It allows the lab to look through, if you want it to, years of management reviews and understand how the lab has grown, what has been effective, or what areas could still use improvement. The outputs for the management reviews are driven by our inputs that we've gone through. As an example, suppose you are reviewing 8.9.2i, the input for customer feedback during your management review. You have a customer that's made a suggestion for how they would like to see test results reported. And having a discussion about it in the management review, your team decides, hey, this is a great idea. We could implement the suggestion to make test results clearer for the customer. Now you have a decision to take an action on an input. Once an action has been made, follow up with this by recording the output. Were the changes to our test result reporting effective? Can we measure how it has improved our laboratories? Are there new resources that we need that have been used as a result of our changes? The outputs do not need to look at each specific input that was named earlier, but they should focus on the inputs in which management recognized that decisions and actions should or could be taken. I'm going to bring back pulse for section 8.9.3 and the management review outputs. When thinking about status for 8.9.3, the management team should be focused on the decisions and actions that have been made or need to be made. The outputs are determined by items identified when discussing the inputs of the management review. So let's look at A, the effectiveness of the management system and its processes. Process, have there been decisions made or actions taken for the management system and its processes? User, what are the decisions and actions we have made in our processes based on customer feedback or complaints? Lab, what are the decisions and actions we have made in our processes based on feedback from lab personnel, or even from decisions and actions based on how the lab is operating? Status, what decisions have been made and or actions taken to make our management system and its processes more effective? What will we continue to do because of effectiveness? What will we change if the desired results are not met? Exposure, have we made any decisions or taken actions based on any area of risk in our management review system or processes? In the following slides, we're going to reveal the top 3 nonconformances of Section 8.9.2 and 8.9.3 identified by A2LA Assessor Corps in 2019. We will briefly discuss the requirements of the standard and also present the various types of objective evidence an assessor would identify as minimum requirements to meet the intent of the standard. Of the top 10 clause nonconformances, citations to the management review, Section 8.9, comprised roughly of 20% of all nonconformances cited by the Assessor Corps in 2019. This graph shows the breakdown of the citations within Section 8.9. Most of the nonconformances from 8.9.2 were tied to not having a complete management review. There may have been evidence that one was recorded, but it may not have had all of the required elements. Assessors are looking for a complete management review that lists every input, A through O. This could look like an agenda for a management review that lists every input. Have objective evidence that supports that these inputs, and make sure that these are written down. Another area that was often cited for 8.9.2 is that the management review timing was detailed in the policy of the labs, but the policy was not being followed. For example, a lab might state in their quality documents that management reviews happen every month. An assessor who sees a statement like this in the quality documents will look for monthly management reviews. If the assessor finds that the lab's own policy is not being followed, it will result in a deficiency. If you are going to prescribe management reviews in your policies, please be sure they're being followed. So let's take a look at this graph for M, results of risk identification. This was the second most cited clause. This was one of the new requirements, and most labs were cited because a discussion around risk was omitted. The assessor wants to know that management has thought about the risks that can impact the laboratory. The minimum requirement is that potential risks can be identified by management and are part of the management review discussion. And the third for this section is K, the effectiveness of any implemented improvements. Again, this is a new requirement. Even if you have not identified all the improvements you would like to implement in your laboratory, an assessor is looking for objective evidence that management is thinking of ways that effectiveness is being measured. At minimum, the discussion may identify ways to measure effectiveness for the next management review. A discussion might look like, if we made improvements due to a corrective action, how effective were those improvements? Or discussion may start with a probing question like, did we achieve our objectives by putting actions into play? The assessor is looking for objective evidence that this has been discussed by a level of the laboratory's management. As we look at 8.9.3, most nonconformances were cited back to the main clause, and they tied back to not having any documented review of the outputs. 60 nonconformances were cited to A, the effectiveness of the management system and its processes. At minimum, assessors are looking for recorded evidence of decisions and actions tied to effectiveness and processes. It does look similar to 8.9.2K, but Section 8.9.3 specifically looks at outputs. Some questions that can begin this discussion on your management team are, were the lab's objectives met since the last management review? If they were, which were most effective? As we talked about a few slides ago, what will we do to continue? What will we continue to do because of effectiveness? What will we change if the desired results are not met? Did we do enough this year, or did we do too much this year? That is the point of measuring effectiveness. And then Clause B, the improvement of laboratory activities related to the fulfillment of the requirements of this document. This had 48 conformances cited in 2019. Again, Section 8.9.3 is asking for recorded decisions and actions. At the minimum, assessors are wanting to see objective evidence that decisions and actions are, at the very least, in the works for the improvement of the laboratory activities. So for example, suppose we have customer feedback that they would like to see test reporting in a different type of way. And so, our management team decided, hey, this is a great idea. Yes, let's make some changes in our test reporting and make improvements there. If the action was to make a change in the reporting, document the actions made and the improvements since the action was taken. In Section 8.9.3, assessors want to see how management decisions are improving laboratory activities. If the improvements are not immediately noted or seen, discuss and record that management is still observing the impact of those actions. If you're having a hard time identifying decisions or actions that may need to be taken, an action might be assigning an internal team specifically to work on outputs, or you may choose to build an external team with a consultant. I also want to point out that your outputs do not necessarily need solutions or resolutions during the management review meeting. If the action recorded is calling for continued improvement in an area, just make sure that you're continuing to document your progress as you move forward with those actions. The management review is an important component of 17025, and it's designed to bring continuous improvement to the work of the lab. So to conclude today, I'm going to point out what I call the 3 Ds of management reviews. Determine the frequency. The 2017 version of the standard does not prescribe how often management reviews should happen in your laboratory. As you work through the management review, remember it's taking a pulse of the life of your lab. Encourage your management team to be thoughtful about this process. It's designed to strengthen the lab's work and bring continuous improvement. Discuss all elements. Discuss each of the elements. All of 8.9.2 and 8.9.3 need to be addressed in the laboratory's management review. And do keep records. As we've gone through this presentation together, you may have realized that you're already doing management reviews in your lab. Avoid nonconformances for Section 8.9 of the standard by having objective evidence that these inputs and outputs are being recorded. A2LA Workplace Training offers a number of courses that are great tools to strengthen the day-to-day work of the lab. You can find out more by going to our website here. And if you have other training needs or you would like workplace training to come to your lab to conduct a training, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Fantastic, Frenika. Thank you. Well, here, let me take the screen back over. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I believe that everybody on the call here today is going to walk away with some key takeaways from what you presented. As she points out, organizations are finding themselves with nonconformities, when they're unable to demonstrate conformances to the processes that they have put in place for their organization. And this often comes down to lack of documentation or that management review is not fully completed, like she said. So when we took the poll in the beginning of the webinar, many of you said that you're using manual systems or using systems like with documents and Excel and share drives. And we speak to organizations with manual systems often because they realize that the manual burden is overwhelming and that they're having problems adhering to the processes that they've put in place. When Frenika talks about how often you're doing management review and making sure that you're performing it on the schedule that you have chosen for your organization. Well, if you have attended a webinar of ours in the past, you know that we usually take a few minutes to explain how people use Qualtrics to help with situations like this. Qualtrics actually comes with a best-in-class built-in workflow for management review that specifically aligns with Frenika's talking points that she just went through. So let's jump into Qualtrics, and I'll take you on a tour and show you what I'm talking about. So when you first log into Qualtrics, you're going to come to your inbox. which is your home page to access the different processes you would like to manage in Qualtrics. Now, I mentioned workflows. Workflows are ways to automate processes where each step is defined with customizable fields and routed with automatic email alerts and notifications, keeping tasks on time and holding employees accountable to finishing those tasks in a timely manner. So I'm going to click, you'll see that we have a management review workflow here. And when I click this, and I want you to look at this diagram, you'll notice it's not a ton of steps here. Step one is just initiating that management review. In this case, the way that this workflow is set up for the year. And at that point, whatever team is involved and the date will get sent to the team for them to start completing the different steps, evaluating the inputs, creating their action items out of those inputs and those reviews, and making sure that those are being managed. Once that management review is complete, then it's going to get submitted to the quality manager for approval. If the quality manager chooses that they have all the information they need and that that is complete, they'll go ahead and approve it and close it, or they might choose that they might need more information, and at that point, it will be returned to that management review group for them to complete it even further. So I'm not going to start one from scratch. I'm actually going to start one that I already have created in the system. So if I jump back to my inbox, this section here in the middle is for my workflows and action items that need to be completed with them. So if I come to management review, I'm actually going to open one that I've already started. With Qualtrics workflows, you have the ability to configure these to best fit your organization's needs. So in terms of how often you want to complete these, who's going to be involved in those processes and such, you have complete control of what that looks like with this workflow. So you can see here, step one is just what year is this referring to, who's going to be involved in that management review, and you have the ability to choose individuals or different groups of people within our system. And then you get to the actual details of the management review. In this case, we're doing our management review at different intervals of the year. And so I'm choosing different areas of the management review to focus at different times of the year. So in January, on the 6th, we went ahead and looked at customer feedback. During that review, we were able to identify some action items, and you can see those details of those action items and how it was resolved down here. Well, being that it's February, we're going to do another one today. So we're going to say that we're going to add a row here. I'm going to choose today's date. At this point, I could upload any agendas or notes that I want to associate with this management review. And today we're going to look at corrective action requests. But you notice we have all of those areas up here of what you would need to look at in terms of management review. So you can get an idea of this is how you make sure that you're touching on all of these areas and that your management review is complete. Because as your auditor comes in, they'll be able to see this information in the workflow and see eventually once this management review is done that you have marked off every area of this management review process. So let's focus on corrective actions for right now. I'm going to scroll down and hit submit. Oh, I'm sorry, hit save changes. That's going to save my work where it is right now. And I'm going to go back to my inbox and I'm going to run a report. Qualtrics reporting is very valuable because it allows you to really dig into all the data that you're collecting. Now you have a couple of options here. You have the ability to run system reports that automatically come with Qualtrics or build your own. In this case, I'm going to run a corrective action report that I have here because I want to see all of the corrective action instances that have been submitted in my system over the period of time so I can start identifying trends and opportunities for improvement or risks for my organization. When I go to run this report, what you'll notice is that you have a number of fields here that you can filter on. So if you wanted to find corrective actions within a certain time frame, or even drill down by current step, you could. I want to run this report. And when I do so and scroll down, you'll see that I have a lot of information about these cars that I have in the system. I can see who initiated it, the current step, the claim of deficiency, the date of the occurrence, what section of the organization, the clause it's associated with within the standard, and maybe the source. And at any point, if I wanted to expand on this report and maybe bring in information about the cause analysis or the plan that was presented and put into implementation, I could even pull in those records as well. But from a trending perspective, what I'm looking for here is opportunities for improvement. So I automatically, my eye is going to go to the clauses. And I notice that I have a number of clauses that are affecting the same section in 6.4 around equipment. In this case, section 6.4.9, 6.4.13G, and C. And if I look to the details, in this case, maybe the instrument wasn't properly taken out of service, the QC checks were not being completed on a regular basis, or in this case, they weren't being logged properly. Maybe somebody was using a paper format, and now that form with that record can no longer be found, and it has been lost. When I'm looking at this information from a management review perspective, I see that this could be a potential risk for my organization. If I don't lock down my equipment tracking in the way that I'm tracking the maintenance and the QC, that I could be putting my laboratory at risk. And so this is absolutely an opportunity for improvement. During that management review process, I'm going to take this information and I'm going to go back to my management review workflow. So come back in here, and this is where I'm going to create my next action item. So if I come down here, I can add a row, choose today's date, give it a number, and you want to give numbers and nomenclatures here just so you can search on it or filter on it if need be with your future reporting. So I've got 2020-02 since it's my second instance. And we're going to say, since we found multiple corrective action requests that pertain to equipment tracking and specifically section in clause 6.4, we really need to evaluate our processes for this section and come up with ways that we can improve our processes. I'm going to assign somebody that's going to own this as their responsibility. In this case, Leslie Kent is going to be the lucky winner of this responsibility. And at this point, she would go and then I'd look at that process and identify ways to improve. Once that's been done, she could even come in here and we'll say that maybe on February 28th, she was able to report back. And she's decided that the best way for them to move forward is actually to rework the process that they have for equipment tracking. Now, in this situation, Leslie and her team have Qualtrics, and so what they've decided to do is implement a equipment maintenance workflow that's going to specifically track the different steps of that equipment maintenance process, making sure people are being held accountable for when that calibrations or maintenance needs to happen, making sure that's all being collected in one place so it can be reported on and records aren't being lost. This was, if you keep in mind from the beginning of when we started this presentation, this is episode 2 of the Nonconformance series. Episode 1 was all around equipment records and calibration records and requirements and how Qualtrics can help manage that. So if you haven't watched that recording or you weren't a part of that presentation, here is actually the link to the webinar. I'll stick it in the chat. Feel free to watch that at any point. And A2LA has some great talking points with that as well. So I would highly recommend checking that out. So once this is done, you'll see that you'll continue to add these different line items and check off the different boxes. Again, making sure that you complete this management review and then send it off to your auditor. Send it to your quality manager. When quality manager review this, they'll be the last person that signs off on it before it's closed. Or if they need more information, it'll go back to the original people within that management review. With Qualtrics workflows, you'll have a lot of different options. And really what these workflows are doing, they're really preventing process deviation. One of the things that Frenika kept on saying is that you make sure that you are adhering to the processes that you put in place. And by using these workflows and using some of the ways that Qualtrics helps, it really holds you to those processes and doesn't give you a way to deviate from them. It holds team members accountable for their actions. And again, it keeps everything in one location so you can easily report on it. With Qualtrics, you have a number of different types of workflows that are available to you. First is our best in class. These are a series of workflows that can come pre-built in your system that are going to automate some of those core ISO processes. So these include corrective action requests, internal audits, if you're a laboratory, proficiency test monitoring and validations, risk assessments, vendor approvals, customer complaints, and management review. Even beyond these workflows, you do have the ability to configure the best in class and create your own. So we've seen organizations really take their use of Qualtrics to the next level and created workflows for everything from, we've seen onboarding workflows to daily cleaning and QC logs, quote requests, purchase requests, and so many more. A2LA actually uses Qualtrics. They're under ISO 17011. We use our own system, and so when we onboard new customers, we're even using workflows to help manage that process. Again, just making sure that things aren't missed and things are being held and people are being held accountable. It's really a great tool. At the end of the day, with quality, the goal is to continuously improving on your processes and have that grow within your organization. Qualtrics is that tool that is really there to help you scale and allow you to expand on your own quality management system. So keep in mind, workflows are really just one aspect of the quality system with Qualtrics. We present ourselves as an all-in-one compliance management solution. So this includes document management, as well as testing and training to help track employee trainings, improve competency. The workflows and document management and testing and training segments of our product all sit on top of that reportable tool that makes everything searchable and easy to report. And this is key when those auditors come in, or even when your audit prep is happening, to make sure that you're ready, so you can make sure that everything is in the right location and that nothing has been missed. All-in-one also refers to our business model. When you purchase Qualtrics, you get all aspects of Qualtrics in one system. We're not a modular-based system. We're not going to show you a souped-up version of the product and not give you those features. At Qualtrics, we believe in being honest and transparent, and what you see is what you get, and it's up to you how you push that out over to your organization. And then the final feature I'll mention before we get to the question and answers is really kind of often looked when you're evaluating products, and that's our customer service. When you're in the mindset of looking for a product to fit your needs and stay within your budget, sometimes you're not thinking about what happens after that product's in place, or what kind of service or support you're going to get from that vendor. We pride ourselves in going above and beyond for our customers. And we have someone today. So you can always ask them what they think about us. Whether it's during the training or implementation phase of the onboarding process, or helping you troubleshoot and navigate through the software, even once you're up and running, we're here to help you through those processes. Our teams are based here right in Blacksburg, Virginia. We actually have about a 98% customer satisfaction rate. It's one of the most common compliments we see on review sites like Capterra, and we believe it's one of our greatest assets and strengths as an organization. So if you haven't checked us out on a site like Capterra, we would love for you to see what people are saying about us. So at this time, I'm going to invite Frenika, if you want to join me. We can start going through some of the questions and answers that are being submitted. Everybody, please continue to put those in. We'll take the next 15, 20 minutes or so to go through these and make sure everybody's getting some of those answers that they want. So keep on coming. Frenika, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
All right. Here we go. We've got a good one. A lot of management, and this one I believe is for you, Frenika. A lot of management comes from a non-science background. How do you find success explaining laboratory activities to non-lab backgrounds?
Yeah, it's interesting because I come from a non-lab background, and so I think first, I think it's good for everybody to acknowledge that there is a learning curve that has to occur, and your management, they do care about what's happening in the lab, and so that's a common way for everyone to meet that, this is who we are, this is what we do, and your management does care about that. And so I think it's good to engage management and helping them to see what we're doing, and then also finding ways to meet. They're looking for key performance indicators. They're looking for the successes and how are we meeting those goals. And so I think it's finding a way to meet in the middle with, okay, this is, for example, I work with calibration labs, and I don't understand all of how oscilloscopes work, but I can see that, when a oscilloscope measurement is successful, these are the kind of uncertainty values that we'll see, and these are the types of things. And so I think it's finding common ways to explain to management that may not have laboratory backgrounds how, what are ways that we can meet in the middle, and how we're doing as a lab and how we're meeting our goals, and putting it in those terms can help everybody kind of come to an understanding that these are the goals and the the actions and the objectives that we're meeting within the lab, so everybody can feel proud of the things that you're doing in the laboratory. I hope that answers that question. If not, type us a little note if you have a specific example.
Great. All right, here's another one. I'm interested in learning in the e-learning from A2LA. Where can I find this section on the A2LA homepage, or can I get a direct link to see more information about what is offered in the A2LA e-learning?
Sure. You can find that. Yeah, thank you for that. That information can be found at www.a2lawpt.org, and all of the information about e-learning courses and instructor-led training, consulting, or coaching, if you are interested in that, it can be found on the workplace training website.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to talk a little bit about the differences between A2LA and A2LA workplace training?
Just a little bit about the differences. So we are two separate companies. A2LA, we are specifically the accrediting body, while workplace training is an organization that does training and e-learning courses to bring support to laboratories that might need that support.
Great. That might help too. So thank you for that.
Okay, no, thank you.
Jacob Teller says, will you be able to share this management review workflow as well as the proficiency test monitoring workflow? And Jacob, I recognize your name and know that you're a customer of ours. And so for anybody who's a customer or is thinking about becoming a customer, when we have our best-in-class workflows, these are available to you. And so if you would like them and like to put those into your instances, feel free to reach out to your account management team member, and they'll be able to talk through how they can get that information to your instance, whether that's through our support team or sending you some information. So the answer is yes, and we're happy to walk you through. In fact, we can probably send them a quick link once this webinar is over, letting them know that you're asking those questions. All right, here's another question. What you are presenting appears to be apt for laboratories testing medical related. How do they bear the cost of such processes and time involvement? And that might be, Frenika, for you, and then I can talk about what we've heard from some of our customers as well. Mm-hmm. So how laboratories are handling this from a time perspective. So if they're,
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, you know, one of the things that you talked about, Karen, is that A2LA, we use Qualtrics in our work. And so we're not a laboratory necessarily, but I've really found it to be a great tool to use in order to make sure that we're following our policies and procedures and processes to the standard that A2LA follows. So that's kind of one thing from not being what you're saying, a medical or a testing related laboratory.
Mm-hmm. And I think from our standpoint, when we talk to organizations of all sizes, like our smallest laboratory that uses us is about 2 people. And some of our bigger enterprise organizations have thousands of users that are using our system. But at the end of the day, they all have to be compliant or accredited. And they need to make sure that they're taking the same type of processes to make sure that they're managing their own processes. And so it's one of these things where I think the reason why 17025 exists and why they want you to be following these from a laboratory perspective is that if you put some of these quality systems and processes in place early, you're preventing yourself from more work later down the road. And so by going through an active management review process on a regular basis, you're identifying those opportunities of improvement and, more importantly, those risks that could later come back to really hurt you and even potentially shut down your laboratory or stop all work from happening. So by adopting a really good quality system from the beginning and pretty much forcing yourself to go through it and making it a priority is something that you're really protecting yourself on later on down the road from. So I hope we were able to answer what your question was there, but if you need us to talk through more, please let us know, or we're happy to take the conversation offline as well. All right. Are the templates of these workflows used today available? Yes, Misty, and I think you probably heard that a little bit when I was talking to Jacob. So for the customers of Qualtrics that are on here, let us know. Reach out to your account management representative, and we can point you in the right direction to get some of these in your system and to make sure that you have the right access to be able to bring them in. I will say the only one that's not a best-in-class workflow that you probably saw is the equipment maintenance workflow, just to make sure everyone knows that. That one is usually very specific to the organization, whether it's a laboratory or even a manufacturer or such. But we can talk about what it looks like to bring and create one of those for you, or make sure that you have the tools and the resources to learn how to build that yourself. Great question. So management review here shows potential issues with chemical inventory lists. Can I create chemical inventory lists within Qualtrics? We do have organizations that do things like this. I think this is a question of where we would really want to understand exactly what you're trying to achieve with this, and what the outcome of what you're trying to collect within Qualtrics is. And so like we have some organizations that do reagent tracking and chemical tracking. You obviously have the ability to create different lists within our system. But we would want to just get on the phone with you and understand exactly what you were trying to achieve within our system, and we'll tell you how to do it within our system, or if there are limitations to what we can do, we'll make sure that we're honest and upfront with that as well. So, so in a way to answer your question, yes, but we would want to have a conversation to make sure that what you're trying to achieve is something that you can do in our system. All right, so this is a question for Frenika from Kimberly Aaron. Hi, Kimberly. Who has to participate in management review?
Hi, Kimberly. I think the management is decided by your laboratory. There, in Section 6.2 of 17025, it talks about personnel and deciding who is management, and from the perspective of the laboratory, it's going to be who are we considering management? Are sales managers included? Are managers, are technician supervisors included? And then deciding, does everyone need to be at that management review, where it's our vice presidents, everyone, the owner of the company, everyone is there? Or are we having management reviews at different levels where we might have executive management at looking at one portion of our management review, and then we have mid-management looking at another part of the management review? It's completely up to you. You just want to ensure that whenever, even if it's different levels of management having reviews, that each of those things are being recorded so that you have documented, yes, we have done this review, we've talked about these inputs, we've talked about these outputs, and it's up to you on depending who you want to be involved in these discussions for the management review.
All right. And so Michael now has a question. Does Qualtrics support storage or change control of templates for management review? And Michael, are you referring to if you find that you need to adjust one of your documents, you want to be able to connect that within your management review? So the way I'm going to answer your question, because I might not be able to see when you submit the clarification I was asking for, is potentially. We do have a way of linking to documents from within our workflows. We have organizations that will actually create change control workflows and change requests or process change requests workflows within Qualtrics. They'll build them to kind of signify like an actual document that needs to be changed. It goes through requests, therefore it's tagging some of the people that are in charge of that document to go ahead and start changing that process. So I think this is one of those conversations where we probably want to dive further into the specifics of what you're asking, and then we can show you what that would look like in our system. All right. And here's another one for you, Frenika. If the lab fails to achieve objective, does it have to give a reason why the objective was not achieved?
Hi, Mohammed. I would say that's up to you. I mean, it's best if you do that. If you're in your corrective action responses, you would want to look at the root causes, and those are helping you to list out reasons why an objective is not achieved, or maybe why there needed to be a corrective action. And so doing your root cause analysis can really help you dive deep. And so I would say that moving forward with listing those reasons that the objective may not have been achieved could help you to have some outputs, or even help you create some inputs and discussion around what can we do to bring improvement to our laboratory. If this did not work, what are some of the reasons why it did not work, and then what can we take from those and improve in the future?
Great. All right. Is there a Qualtrics checklist for setup in compliance with ISO 17025? So there's a couple of ways to think about this. So when your accrediting body sends you the checklist, or what you need to make sure that you're reviewing, that's when you start looking at your quality system within Qualtrics to see how your processes that you've created aligns with that checklist that A2LA or ANAB or PGLA have sent you, or your CB. Within Qualtrics, though, there are some ways to check to make sure you're ready for your audit. For example, specifically around document management, we have the ability to bring in the 17025 standard, of course, the 2017 version, where you can align your documents to the standard so you can run gap analysis reports. So you can specifically see where you have gaps. And if you don't have documentation supporting specific areas within the standard, you know that that documentation needs to be created or associated with that portion of the standard and that specific clause. And so there are ways to do those gap analysis type reports within Qualtrics. You know, we didn't go dive into document management today, but that might be something to check out as well. Next question, and these are great questions, guys, so keep them coming. We have a couple more minutes, so we'll see how many words we can get through. Ricardo asks, I'm new to Qualtrics and I understand it's specifically geared toward internal quality management. However, can accrediting bodies use Qualtrics as an accreditation management system? And if you're talking, Ricardo, about accreditation management systems in the sense that it acts as kind of like a go-between between the laboratory or the organization that you're accrediting, potentially. And that's something where we would want to dive into further into what you're trying to do for your organization and how you would set it up. Qualtrics is very configurable. You know, what you saw today in terms of the workflows is really just scratching the surface and what some of those processes can and what you can do within the system itself. We have organizations that are using Qualtrics as an accreditation management tool to help manage their accreditation efforts with their customers. In fact, if you're familiar with the CAP and the CAP, they're one of our customers. They're using it to help manage their ISO, their IS, or their CAP 15189 program. So if that's something that you want to have conversations about, again, we would want to take those probably off the webinar just to truly understand what your goals are of the project and if that's something that we feel we would be able to help with you achieving. But at the end of the day, Qualtrics is standard agnostic in a way. It doesn't matter the type of standard you can bring in, and that's why A2LA and Frenika, they're using the system today. You know, because they've got to show that they're in conformance with the processes they've put in place for ISO 17011. So the system really can be used to manage a lot of different types of compliance. For workflows shown, for example, corrective actions, is it appropriate to be assigned to an analyst to be entered? And then at the designated frequency, the designated management will review and discuss items and the analyst entered as a part of management review. Sure. This is one of those scenarios where you get the idea of these best-in-class workflows is to give you a template to get started. You know, with Qualtrics, we're trying to give you the tools to get you working within the workflows, but with the idea that it's now time for you to make them your own. If you have specific processes in your organization that are working for you and your organization, you put them in place for a reason, and we want to give you a system that will help you keep those processes. So even if you start with one of our corrective action request workflows, what you'll find is that you can simply go into our system, start rearranging who can do what step of that process, and start changing the fields at the different steps, or even add additional steps altogether. It's completely up to you. And if you're interested in seeing more of what that looks like, we're happy to show you. And Robin, uh, how are records stored in Qualtrics? Are they docs, PDFs, for example? If I were to retrieve a record in Qualtrics, can it be printed? Can you format the printing? Lots of answers there. So when in terms of documents, you don't have a restriction on the type of document that you can bring into Qualtrics. At the end of the day, when you're editing documents within our document management portion of the product, you're editing them in their native format. Once they're even in Qualtrics, you have the ability to convert them to a PDF. So when they are a PDF version, people know that they're locked down. Now, in terms of printing, there are ways to change the PDF version so that printing icon is taken away. However, the way that you really want to protect your documents is through the formatting, like you're asking with the printing. By putting different templates on all of your documents and standardizing those templates, it's very common that we see our customers put at the bottom of their documents, printed versions of these documents are considered uncontrolled. And by doing that, they're protecting themselves from people that would print it even if you tell them not to, and that could be found by an auditor at some point. So make sure it's a great way and something that we can talk through in best practices when we're helping you implement your system. Also, how can the records be transmitted to an auditor? Sometimes they ask for certain items off-site prior to doing it on-site, and so they would be sent them info that they request. Couple of options that you have here. Some of our auditors, if they're very familiar with Qualtrics because they use it themselves, you can even grant them access to Qualtrics instances if they're willing to accept that. The other option is through our reports. All of our reports are exportable, and so you can quickly export them to CSV or Excel files. If you need to wrap them up in documentation and then send them off to your auditor, you can do that as well. And so you definitely can get the information out of Qualtrics when needed. And then last question, and I see we're already 2 minutes over, so I'll answer it quick. I know that Qualtrics is working on sending less emails, admirably, with the question of the best-in-class workflows, maybe an email to us with a yes or no on whether we would like more information about the workflows would be helpful. And Sarah, you have the same questions as Misty and Jacob. And I think that's a great note, and we'll make sure that we keep that in mind and make sure our team hears that as well. So thank you so very much. I think that's a great point that you bring up there, Sarah. So everyone, thank you so very much for your time. Frenika, what a wonderful presentation. And
thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everyone that's on the call, we would love to hear your feedback, what you think of the presentation. Are we hitting the mark? Or what other topics would you like to hear from us? I mean, again, this is our second installment of this webinar, and we're always looking for areas and ways to improve. If you found value in this, please feel free to come back to some of the other episodes that we have later on. So again, Frenika, thank you. Wonderful presentation. And
thank you, Karen.
Sure. Everyone, you have a great day. Bye-bye.